Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. My name's Jack Sullivan and I never thought my life would take the turn it did when my wife, Emma, and I moved to Sycamore Lane. It was a quaint street in a sleepy New England town, a place where every house looked like it belonged on a postcard. It was exactly what we wanted: peaceful, quiet, and the perfect spot to start fresh after the chaos of city life. We'd found a house at a bargain, which, looking back, should have been a red flag. It was a two-story colonial with peeling white paint, a wraparound porch, and an old oak tree in the front yard that seemed to groan every time the wind touched it. The kind of house that came with character or baggage, depending on how you looked at it. The first few days were uneventful, aside from the usual unpacking chaos. Emma was ecstatic, already talking about repainting the kitchen and planting flowers in the front garden. I was happy to see her excited. It had been a tough year for us, and we both needed this fresh start. But something about the house unsettled me from the moment we stepped inside. It wasn't anything obvious, no creaky floors or flickering lights, no eerie cold spots or phantom footsteps. Just a feeling like the walls were watching me, like the house itself was holding its breath. I didn't say anything to Emma at first. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. We bought the house fair and square, and there was no reason for me to feel this way. Then, on the third night, things started getting strange. I just settled into bed with a book while Emma scrolled through her phone beside me. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of crickets outside. I was halfway through a chapter when I heard it, a soft creak. I looked up from my book. The sound had come from downstairs. "Did you hear that?" I asked, turning to Emma. "Hear what?" She didn't even glance up. "Sounded like someone on the stairs." She raised an eyebrow. "It's an old house, Jack. Old houses make noise." She was probably right, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I set the book down and climbed out of bed. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Just checking something," I muttered. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd left by the door, habit from our city days, and headed down the hallway. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, each step amplifying the silence around me. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Everything was as we'd left it: boxes half unpacked, furniture covered in dust sheets. But then I saw it, the front door. It was wide open. I froze. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the room, gripping the bat tightly. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered glass or broken locks. Just the door swinging gently on its hinges like it had been opened by the wind, except the air outside was still. I stepped forward, my eyes darting to every shadow in the room. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No answer. I closed the door and locked it, checking the bolt twice for good measure. I even checked the windows to make sure they were secure. Then I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. That's when I saw it, something that made my blood run cold. In the dusty wooden floorboards near the door, there were footprints. Bare footprints leading from the door to the middle of the room and then stopping. No prints leading out. No sign of where the person had gone. They just ended. I turned around slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But there was no one there, just shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning I didn't tell Emma about the footprints. Not yet. Something told me this was just the beginning. The morning after I found the footprints, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, or maybe my own imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better. Emma was already downstairs, humming softly as she made coffee. She looked so carefree, so happy. I didn't want to ruin that with my paranoia, so I plastered on a smile and pretended everything was fine. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The footprints, the open door. The way the air in the house felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. As I sipped my coffee, I decided to take a closer look around the house. Maybe I'd missed something last night, some logical explanation that would put my mind at ease. "Hey," I said casually, "I'm going to check out the basement today. See if there's anything down there we need to clean up." Emma wrinkled her nose. "The basement? Good luck. I peeked down there yesterday. It's a disaster. Probably full of spiders." I laughed, trying to keep things light. "Spiders I can handle." The truth was, I wasn't worried about spiders. I was worried about what or who might have been in the house last night. The basement door was at the back of the house, near the kitchen. It creaked loudly as I opened it, revealing a set of rickety wooden stairs that led into darkness. I flicked the light switch on the wall, and a single bulb buzzed to life, casting dim yellow light over the space below. The basement was exactly what you'd expect in an old house like this: low ceilings, exposed beams, and concrete floors stained with decades of neglect. The air was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. I started looking around, checking for anything unusual. At first, it was just the typical junk: old boxes, rusted tools, a broken chair. But then I noticed something strange in the far corner of the room. A door. It was small, almost child-sized, and made of warped wood. The paint was peeling, and the edges were framed by cobwebs. It didn't look like it had been opened in years. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crouched down to inspect it. There was no handle, just a keyhole, but I didn't have a key. I pressed my ear against the door, half expecting to hear something on the other side. And that's when I heard it, a faint whisper. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. It was so soft I could have convinced myself I'd imagined it, except I knew I hadn't. I was about to call out to Emma when something caught my eye. Scrawled on the wall beside the door in faded red letters was a single word: "Leave." My stomach twisted into a knot. The letters looked old, decades old, but why would someone write that? And why here? Before I could think too much about it, I heard Emma's voice calling from upstairs. "Jack, you okay down there?" I forced myself to sound calm. "Yeah, just a lot of junk. I'll be up in a minute." I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. The whisper, the writing, the feeling of being watched, it was too much to ignore. I needed answers. That night, after Emma went to bed, I stayed up researching the house. I didn't want to alarm her until I knew what we were dealing with. It didn't take long to find something. The house had a history, a long, dark history. Back in the 1950s, it had belonged to a man named Robert Gaines. He was a recluse, rarely seen by his neighbors, but they all knew about the strange things that happened in his house: lights flickering, strange noises, even reports of people seeing shadows moving in the windows when no one was home. Then, one day, Robert disappeared. No one knew what happened to him, but the rumors started almost immediately. Some said he'd gone mad and fled. Others believed he'd been murdered. But the most chilling theory was the one that kept me staring at my screen long after midnight. They said he wasn't alone in the house. They said something had been living with him, something he couldn't escape. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. The next morning, I told Emma we needed to leave. She laughed it off at first, thinking I was joking. But when she saw the look in my eyes, her smile faded. "Jack, what's going on? Why are you acting so weird?" I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane, so I told her about the open door, the footprints, the warning in the basement. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern, but not in the way I'd expected. "Jack," she said quietly, "you locked the door last night." "I saw you do it, I know," I said. "But when I came downstairs, it was open." She shook her head. "No, it wasn't. I came down before you did." The door was closed. My blood ran cold. If the door hadn't been open, then where had the footprints come from? Emma's words haunted me for the rest of the day. If she'd seen the door closed, then I had no explanation for what I'd seen the night before: the footprints, the door swinging open, the faint whisper. And the worst part, I could tell Emma didn't fully believe me. She didn't say it outright, but I could see it in her face. She thought I was overreacting. But I knew what I'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the bedroom door, listening for any sound, any sign that something was wrong. Emma was sound asleep beside me, her soft breathing the only thing keeping me grounded. Around 8 a.m. I heard it again. The whisper. It wasn't coming from the hallway this time. It was closer. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and strained to listen. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a soft, rhythmic murmur, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I nudged Emma awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She groaned, half asleep. "Hear what?" "Listen." She sat up reluctantly, rubbing her eyes. For a moment, the room was silent, and I thought maybe the noise had stopped. But then it came again, just loud enough for both of us to hear. Emma froze. "Jack, is that?" "I don't know," I said, cutting her off. The sound was coming from downstairs. I grabbed the baseball bat and motioned for Emma to stay put. "Lock the door behind me," I whispered. "Jack, don't just do it." She hesitated, but when I stepped into the hallway, I heard the soft click of the lock behind me. The house was pitch dark, the kind of darkness that made every shadow feel alive. I moved slowly, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles ached. The whispering grew louder as I descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. It was coming from the living room. I rounded the corner, and there it was again, that same eerie whisper, faint but insistent. It didn't sound like one voice, though. It sounded like several, overlapping and tangled, like a crowd murmuring all at once. I scanned the room, but it was empty. The windows were closed, the front door locked. Nothing was out of place, except the basement door. It was open. The whispering grew louder as I approached it, and I could feel the air around me grow colder with every step. I flicked on the light, illuminating the rickety wooden stairs. The sound was coming from below, echoing up from the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to wake Emma and leave the house for good. But something stronger, a mix of curiosity and stubbornness, kept me moving forward. I descended the stairs, the bat held tightly in my hands. The basement looked the same as it had that morning, dim, damp, cluttered with junk. But the sound was louder now, almost deafening. It was coming from the small door in the corner. I approached it slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The door was still as I'd left it, worn, cobwebbed, with that single word scrawled beside it. Leave. I crouched down, my breath fogging in the cold air, and placed my hand on the door. The whispering stopped. The silence was worse. My entire body tensed as I leaned in, trying to hear anything, movement, breathing, anything. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard a voice. Clear as day. Jack. I stumbled back, the bat clattering to the floor. My name. It had said my name. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut, locking it for good measure. My hands were trembling as I stood there, trying to catch my breath. Emma was at the top of the stairs, her face pale. Jack, what happened? There's something down there, I said, my voice shaking. Something not human. She stared at me. Why died, but before she could respond, we both heard it. The doorbell. We froze, staring at each other. It was nearly 3 a.m. Who would be at our door in the middle of the night? I grabbed the bat again and moved cautiously toward the front door. Emma closed behind me. I peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. Then, as I turned away, the knocking started. Loud, deliberate, and coming from the basement door. The knocking from the basement door echoed through the house, each thud making my heart slam harder in my chest. Emma clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Jack, she whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, torn between fear and disbelief. Something was down there, something that knew my name, and now it wanted in. Go upstairs, I said, my voice barely steady. What? No, I'm not leaving you. Emma, please. I turned to her, gripping her shoulders. Lock yourself in the bedroom. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the basement door. Jack, what if? Just go, I said firmly. She nodded reluctantly and hurried up the stairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door lock before turning back to face the basement. The knocking had stopped for a moment. The silence was so complete it felt suffocating. I stared at the door, bat in hand, waiting for anything to happen. And then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. I tightened my grip on the bat, every muscle in my body tensing. The knob twisted back and forth, rattling like someone was trying to force it open. But the lock held. Who's there? I demanded, my voice shaking. No answer. The rattling stopped, replaced by a faint scratching sound like nails dragging across wood. And then I heard it again. Jack. The voice was low and guttural this time, almost a growl. It wasn't coming from the basement anymore. It was behind me. I spun around, swinging the bat wildly, but the room was empty. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I scanned every shadow, every corner. That's when I heard the sound of breaking glass. It came from upstairs. Emma, I bolted up the stairs at a time, the bat clutched tightly in my hands. The hallway was dark, but I could see shards of glass glinting in the moonlight from the bedroom window. Emma, I shouted, throwing open the door. She was standing by the bed, pale and trembling, pointing at the broken window. Jack, someone's outside. I crossed the room and looked out. The backyard was still bathed in silvery light. But then I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. They were tall and thin, their face hidden in shadow. For a moment they just stood there, motionless, staring up at the window. and then they turned and disappeared into the trees. I felt Emma's hand on my arm, pulling me back. "We need to call the police," she said. She was right. I grabbed my phone and dialed, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost too calm, as I explained what had happened: the knocking, the voice, the figure in the yard. She assured me an officer would be there within minutes and told me to stay put. But as I hung up, I realized something. The house was too quiet. "Emma," I said slowly, "did you lock the basement door?" She looked at me, confused. "I thought you did." My blood ran cold. The silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the basement stairs. We backed away as the footsteps reached the door. The handle rattled once, twice, and then the door burst open, but there was no one there. Just the dark, yawning mouth of the basement and the sound of breathing, deep, ragged breathing coming from the shadows. The sound of breathing filled the air, low and guttural, coming from the blackness of the basement. Emma clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin as we stared at the open doorway. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "Stay behind me?" I tightened my grip on the bat and stepped forward, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it would burst out of my chest. The air spilling from the basement was icy, heavy with a damp, earthy smell that made my stomach churn. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the stairs. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, a shape began to emerge from the shadows. At first, it was just a vague outline, barely distinguishable from the darkness. But as it stepped into the dim light of the hallway, I saw it clearly, and I wished I hadn't. It was a man, or at least it had been once. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes. He wore tattered clothes, stained with something dark and unidentifiable. But the most horrifying part was his mouth. It was twisted into an unnatural grin, his teeth yellow and jagged, and his eyes, they were black. Completely black, like twin voids that seemed to pull you in and swallow you whole. Emma let out a strangled gasp, and the thing tilted its head toward her, that grotesque grin widening. "Jack," it said, its voice a guttural rasp that made my skin crawl. It took a step toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. I swung the bat with everything I had, but it passed right through the thing as if it wasn't even there. It didn't flinch, didn't react, just kept moving closer. "Emma, run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the front door. We sprinted outside, the cold night air stinging my lungs. I didn't stop until we were standing in the middle of the street, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind us, dark and silent. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd escaped. Then I saw it. The figure was standing in the front window, watching us, and it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes began to appear, their hollow eyes and twisted grins glowing faintly in the darkness. I grabbed Emma's hand. "We have to go, now." We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, where the flashing lights of a police car finally came into view. The officer who arrived, a gruff, no-nonsense type named Officer Harlow, listened to our story with a skeptical frown. He agreed to check the house but told us to stay back. We watched from the safety of his patrol car as he disappeared inside. For several minutes there was nothing but silence. Then, suddenly, His voice crackled over the radio. "This is Harlow. I'm going to need backup. There's something down here." Static. The next thing we heard was a blood-curdling scream, followed by a deafening crash. The radio went dead. Emma and I stared at each other, paralyzed with fear. Minutes later, more police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the night. Officers stormed the house, but when they came out, they looked pale and shaken. They wouldn't tell us what they'd found. The next morning, the house was boarded up, and we were told not to return. The official story was that Officer Harlow had fallen and injured himself in the basement. No mention of the voices, no mention of the figure in the window. But Emma and I knew the truth. We moved out of town the next day, leaving everything behind. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. And when I close my eyes, I see those black, hollow eyes staring back at me. I don't know what we unleashed in that house, but I know one thing for certain. It's still there, waiting. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.